Morning. It's a pleasure to be among friends and talk a bit forest restoration here in Brazil, and above all about the union for this restoration that we will be discussing here. I am Leonardo Lacerda, and I work as the Director for Climate International from a Nature Conservancy. And it is a satisfaction and an honor to be the moderator in this debate here together with you. So we have to be very clear. If we want to reach the so wanted neutrality until 2050, it is impossible to do so without restoration. It's impossible not to have a system that can absorb and capture carbon. All these scenarios show this need, and we did a study and seeing that until 2070, if we use only the CCS, the different forms of engineering to be able to sequester and store carbon, this would mean a cost of $74 trillion, whereas the natural solutions would cost 14 trillion. So it's a fundamental difference. And in this area is an area that we know which is ready with fewer risks than another thing that is much unknown. I'm not saying that perhaps both are not necessary, but the urgency is here at our doors. And so it is urgent and to work in this agenda, we cannot do otherwise. As a global recognition of all of this, we saw at an international level the recognition by the Bonn Challenge, the Challenge of Bonn, that was renewed with New York's declaration in 2014 in such a way that we can restore at least 150 million hectares until 2030. And we know that this kind of restoration would imply, perhaps, would generate 9 trillion of benefits in terms, let's say, and benefits to the environment, including social and environmental services to the world. I believe that until 2020, already 162 countries had committed in reaching these targets. The 62 governments actually had committed in restoring 172 million hectares. We are on the good path, but we need more. So, being very honest, the reality has shown that to commit with this is much more complex than only good intentions. So we are here to discuss what are the challenges that we have found, how can we overcome them, and how do we increase and provide more scale to this work. It is with this spirit of overcoming these hurdles that Conservation International, World Resources Institute, WWF, and TNC, they created this Union for the Restoration. And it is an initiative with the ambition of restoring at least 4 million hectares of forests in the Atlantic forest, in the Brazilian savanna, and in the Amazon region. And this is what we're going to hear about. And to introduce and said why this union was creating and to highlight also the challenges that we have dealt with and also how we can expedite this process is that we are having this conversation here today. And for this, we have the presence of a very selected group in this panel, people who are heavy in this understanding for several years. I would like to ask each of one of them to introduce themselves, starting with you, Carolina. And I'm sorry, she's not using a microphone. So currently a director of forest program from BR Brazil, was one of the pioneers. I'm so sorry. First event of the day. I'm sorry for not using the microphone. So Carolina Geni, climate director of WRI Brazil, and currently vice director of WRI Brazil. This was one of the pioneers in the organizations here present in the window of restorations here in Brazil. So we are very happy to see this collective to put some pressure in terms of gaining more scale in a technique that we are pioneers and we have a lot of expertise in. Good morning, everybody. I'm Alexandre Parado, Director of Economy of WWF Brazil, and I'm happy to be here celebrating this partnership. I believe this is one among many that are so necessary to all of us. Have a nice day. So thank you, Alexandre. And thank you, Carolina. And it is a good opportunity to ask the first question to Miguel Moraes, who is with us from Brazil. First of all, thank you very much for waking up so early for us to kicking you out of bed, Miguel. So if you could introduce yourself and tell us what motivated the creation of this union for the restoration and what is in terms of innovation, what is different there? Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you for the question and for the opportunity of being here with you, even far away, but I feel so close to you in Glasgow. Good morning, I'm Miguel Moraes. I'm a biologist. I did my master's degrees in tropical botanics, but also in doctor's degrees in public policies and sustainability. And now I'm working as senior director of program in the International Conservation. I take care of the implementation of a strategic program in Brazil, and an enormous pleasure to be here with you. This is a very good question. I believe that all of us, we are concerned with the impact of climate change and in local communities and the peoples of the forest, especially related to this concept of accelerated change on Earth. And this threatens the integrity and the working of natural systems. Our tropical forests, for instance, they are near a tipping point. And everybody knows that and we then discuss legal and illegal deforestation. Of course, that in Brazil, 90% of the deforestation is a result of illegal intervention. So we have to stop deforestation and degradation of the soil now. And the only way of doing this is valuing and offering opportunities so people don't have to get involved in illegal activities. So we believe that the restoration of landscapes can be one of the main pillars for a low carbon economy and for fostering a deep change, not only to stop deforestation, but to generate new revenues, not only related to the sustainable use of forests, but also innovation in goods and services to provide scale to the restoration, because we are talking of the structuring of a whole sector of the economy. We can generate job positions with restoration. I'm not mentioning here only the jobs of those who plant trees, but those who collect seeds, cultivate seedlings, the donor clones of drones operation, finance specialists, extractivists, a series of job positions necessary to structure this chain. And with the decade of United Nations to restore systems, we have another 10 years to restore natural systems, and we all have a role to perform. The decade aims to interrupt and reverse this process of degradation, either in continental ecosystems or in the oceans. But the basic assumption is that with the restoration, we can help to fight poverty, we can fight climate change and prevent a series of other problems or mitigate them. It is clear to all that the restoration It goes directly with all the objectives of sustainable development. So we are not talking about an environmental agenda only, but also an agenda of development. But now we need more converging efforts if we want to increase the scale of restoration, about mitigation and adjustments too. So millions today are invested in restoration, but the efforts sometimes they are scattered and restricted to a small-scale intervention. In Brazil, for instance, when we look for the actions of restoration in the Amazon region, we have many small initiatives, and they are all threatened by the low permanence of the secondary vegetation, which is not protected in Brazil. So why should I invest millions in the restoration if I cannot protect the secondary forest? Am I going to throw this money down the drain? We see in Brazil that there are institutions extremely important that are operating. And in addition, there are scientists and restorators. They are worldly known. They are referenced in this agenda. So we have a community of restoration in Brazil, extremely organized, self-organized, and very mature. So we have three platforms that really change the situation with the implementation of the actions of restoration. You said how complex to implement these initiatives was, and we have three networks: the Pact for the Restoration of the Atlantic Forest, the Alliance for the Restoration of the Amazon Forest, and now for the Savannah. And these networks is what we have at the best in terms of scientific practice. In the scientific plan, for you to understand the importance of these networks, they work as national chapters in the Brazilian Society of Ecological Restoration, which is an important hub for the science of restoration. And here we have seen that the best way of helping would be to creating opportunities for the development of more coordinated interventions for the long term. The restoration community would leader. And here we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Actually, it was to put on the floor what we have committed to make it work, to deliver. And how would it be? The WWF, WRI, TNC, they were talking even with the same people and the same organizations. We came to the conclusion that we had an important role to perform. And even more than this, that doing this together, we would go further. So when we talk about innovation, usually we expect something new. And in my opinion, the Union for the Restoration, it innovates doing something different. It innovates in the how, because here the commitment is to prioritize common points defined by these governance structures that already exist, like these platforms that were mentioned. So a structure from the bottom to the top to accelerate climate action instead of coming with a top-down initiative that many times cannot have is not very well implemented in the territory. So instead of working to develop new initiatives that will compete with the resources, we decided to commit with the already existing initiatives. That is, beyond this concern, we have a concern with delivery, with the results. We want to be sure that we can create opportunities for the community of restoration. And the best way of doing this is to strengthen these platforms, to work with these local organizations. We are very proud of the Pact, of the Alliance, of the recently created Latitude, and we believe that the world can learn a lot with this initiative. So we are not inventing new targets, new objectives. We are working with what we have. We work what we want to work. The commitment is the result, and we only have 1 decade to do this. According to our legislation, we have more than 20 million hectares to be restored. It's a lot of land, right? First, approach to measure 12 million hectares with different approaches and techniques. But the government says that this is being done. They already deliver more than 12 million hectares because they analyze what is happening now. But we know this not. We don't have monitoring. We don't have maintenance. It's not being restored. It's just a simple process of nature with a low permanence of the forest here in Brazil. It is scary to think that this will move forward like this. So we need support, we need recognition to show that these initiatives has enormous potential to reach far away. That's why we are commitment with what this 1/3 of the 12 million, and we commit with 4 million. So it's a vision and union that is turned to actions that can expedite this process and that help us to increase the climate action through the restoration of landscapes. So our objective is to support these initiatives with a potential of delivery. We have to change gears and allow the local population to show the way. We have to work together. And I believe that the CI and all the other organizations that are involved, we are very happy to be part of this union because we really believe that we can transform this reality and change things, implement in place a restoration on the tracks. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much. And an incredible capacity of being so articulate and so early. I imagine just with a short coffee, but it's very important what you said. That is an initiative that is trying to deliver 1/3 of what Brazil committed to. So if I ask you, Carolina, what are actually the benefits of the forest restoration in Brazil? Do we have any evidence that actually restoration in Brazil is something that is interesting for the farmer, for the grower?
Here I go. Yes, the answer to that is yes. The benefits of restoration in Brazil are very well mapped.
In Brazil are very good mapped already. And only the alliance we see here is a very good evidence. So we have 4 institutions of the size of ours. We're working integrated. Everyone has a clear role to fight a problem, a highly complex problem. So this is very, very important. Nature is a key element to fight climate change and also to fight climate change with well-being for the population. This is very important. This is linked. And we need a transition from our economic model to a low-carbon economic model. And it is very important not to create more inequality, but to eradicate inequality we have. And this is really, this is a key benefit. So the recovery of degraded ecosystems, and here in Brazil, we work in a lot of ecosystems that need a lot of special work. This is a way to capture carbon from the atmosphere, and we hope that we can turn this into a value so Brazil can have economy linked to the carbon market. We are leading this. We have a very good benefit for the agriculture, so the producers that work with agroforest practice, they see that they can produce food, and this can give food safety. Also, the land use is of a higher quality, so ownership, the whole community is more resilient to floods, to droughts, and other extreme events. So this is something we can already see. And also the employment, so the generation of jobs. And WNAVEC, I have some very interesting figures here to share with you. About 190,000 jobs can be created if Brazil can reach the recovery goal. WRI estimated that the recovery of the forest can create 3 times more jobs than oil and gas sector. And that's, we need to check what do we want to prioritize. then we need to think also about the new markets for the restoration. We'll have a lot of native trees. They are not yet explored economically, and we can have a return of 12% in 20 years if we invest in native species compared to traditional agricultural systems. We also calculated that for each invested dollar in research, we can have a financial return from $2.3. So all these investments and all the researches we did, what we get in terms of cost benefit with this restoration, all these figures are so positive. And well, we really can see these benefits coming up. And it's important to say also in the same line, we have a very high cost benefit, and restoration doesn't need to be something expensive. Especially if we have it assisted. So we are talking about nature. Nature cannot regenerate, well, can on his own, but it would be so much easier with help of people. So this is an assisted recovery, and that is not very expensive. You really, it's easy to care for, and you will comply with legislation and have a lot of opportunities. So assisted generation can restore bigger areas, and this is very important. So in the beginning, scale is very important. And another Brazilian experience I find very interesting, and that shows the power of civil society, is the Brazilian Observatory of Restoration, one of the first mechanisms created to use satellite images with data where the natural restoration is happening. And it was possible to identify that Brazil has 11 million hectares with a natural regeneration in every ecosystem. So look how big this work is. And in the end, I would like to highlight something we don't talk about. That's the benefit to save public money. This is a natural infrastructure. For example, when we have riverside forests, riparian forests, and for example, in São Paulo, if we restore 4,000 hectares in a priority region, for example, at the water reservoir Cantareira, you can save 338 million real public money in 30 years. Why? Because the administration doesn't need to spend money in chemicals and unnecessary constructions. So we have benefits for the producer, for society, for public money. And of course, you are complying with the Brazilian environmental laws. Thank you. So we heard now about the 3 different pacts of each ecosystem of each of the biomes. Alexandre, can you explain a little bit how these institutional agreements work? Because this is a very complex world with a lot of agents. We have governmental agents on a federal level and a state level. We have some associations of producers. Could you please explain us a little bit how this huge agreement, how this huge structure is working? Thank you, Leonardo. Well, this is really the 1 million question, because what I feel is that the restoration process, so we are very aware, as Miguel already said, there is some pricing, Carol showed this, and why isn't it happening? So, well, probably the arrangements, that's we have something like a Paris Agreement in a small scale. We try to do it top down, nothing worked. And this comes from different partners, and yes, and we are trying to scale it up for everyone. So WRI thinks about engaging to make a difference. So I think engagement of private sector is very, very important. The landowners, big companies that participate in these processes and that help us to build this large scale. Then we have engagement of society to organize, to see how society so we are doing. So the Olympics of restoration with more than 4,000 for a year, 1.5 years, how you can do that. And in some years when our kids are working, they will be aware of what it's important to do. So a very important thing is also intelligence. We need the territorial intelligence and partnerships. We need to structure the information and how this information gets to the decision makers, to the responsible people that is working. So what are the best ways? For example, restoration in Cerrado should be something different. And of course, the decision makers. As Carol said, if you compare it to oil and gas, the restoration has a higher potential to create jobs. So why aren't we doing it? So how can we create a critical mass of consumers, of generators of products and services? What do we have today? We have small, very interesting cases of a partnership. We have the partnership of 4 big organizations that work in some biomes, and so every 1,000 hectares we can generate 200 jobs. This would be 80,000 jobs in this partnership, and then we can scale it up to 20 and 40. So then we can reach the goals, and we can support the society in this active regeneration process, of course, based on nature, but we can also have a social and an economic gain with it, out of it. Yes, thank you very much for clarifying this, Alexandre, to tell us how this works, how these arrangements work. And what is very interesting is also that in every biome, these agreements are being done from none. And perhaps I can explain how we are working at the TIC. And I would say if at Cerrado we have Araticum network, or if you have a park and the Atlantic forest, we have this alliance. This alliance was founded in 2017, and it's part of a strategic circle. And this is a very sectorial group. We have more than 80 organizations. We started working with research first, just to understand what's happening, what's already there. And then we identified 10,000 initiatives, 3,000 different initiatives for reforestation in the Amazon. And we selected 10 with the potential to gain that can be scaled up quickly, so we could get this 4 million on national level. So 3 goals, we align our work in 3 goals to overcome these obstacles. We have 3 problems. So how can we give value to the standing forest? So perhaps it's easier in the agroforest systems, but also the forests. And how can we create, and this is fundamental, how can we create the financial mechanisms and creative mechanisms, and how can we get private initiative on board to have this huge scale restoration? And also, as Alexandre said, how can we create a value chain from the production of seeds and so on? So these are the most important principles, the 3 principles. And our job is to work in coordination. We are part of a working group of bioeconomy, agroforest bioeconomy. And here we helped to develop a strategic planning for the next 5 years, also with the monitoring plan. This is very important. And it's important to have good numbers to manage the system. Well, our main goal is, and what we know how to do is to create pilots on the field to say that it is possible. I would like to share one of these examples with you further on, but we created a different profile for each type of agent. So most important agents, both are the producers and cattle raising. How can we get forest and cattle raising together? And also the small producer. So agroforest seems to be the best program, and agroforest linked with the generation of natural forest, as we already heard in this discussion today. So until now, I would say we learned a lot with our work in the generation of Atlantic forests. And one of the most interesting aspects is about finance mechanisms. So how can we get other agents, especially private sector, on board to help on this process? For example, water at the Mantiqueira Mountains, we have experienced how can the user downstream of a hydropower system can pay for environmental services of the rural producers upstream.
So we learned a lot about how to finance these schemes, and also in terms of governance for the basin. And more recently, we have developed a way to release a voluntary carbon scheme to help farmers to pay for the restoration process. Over 20 years, this has resulted in 107,000 hectares restored along the Mantiqueira chain of mountains. So it took 20 years for 107,000 hectares. How is it in 10 years we now restore 4 million? But you see, this idea of acceleration has guided a very interesting project we are developing now with Amazon.inc in the state of Pará. The state of Pará is super important. They represent 9% of tropical forests in the world. In the year 2020, 47% of deforestation in Brazil happened in the state of Pará. We have over 360,000 families of small farmers, and they are responsible for about 1/3 of deforestation in that state. So we asked, how can we solve this problem? And so we thought about this accelerator for restoration and for the agri-forest. So together with Amazon, ICRAF, and the state government, and the various associations of farmers, we developed a project to restore 18,000 hectares of forest over the next 5 years. This involves 3,000 family farmers, and we are first going to restore 9,000 hectares of native forests and 9,000 hectares of agri-forestry production, especially with cocoa, banana, and cassava. So this is something that can be sold, it's family production, subsistence, etc., and everyone stands to gain. So Amazon, from the viewpoint of the donor, Amazon will count on 10 million tons of carbon until 2030. So for their process of for the goal they have to become neutral by 2040, this will work out, and the region will seek a type of income that is more interesting than livestock. It takes longer, and you require initial capital for production in livestock, and at the same time you are restoring assets there. I wanted to share this example and then now open the floor for questions. And I must also add that my hope is that during this meeting, we will talk about Article 6, which is basic for us to try and achieve some order in the carbon market, guaranteeing transparency and avoiding duplication in the accounts, and guaranteeing that we will have a sturdy system for carbon, and with much more results than just some tiny cases here and there of voluntary participation. So I would like to open the floor now in case there are questions. First of all, I would like to congratulate you. It's very nice to see you spoke about major institutions working along this line in Brazil, but I would like to understand a little better because when we speak about restoration, we mostly think of the forest, and I understand you're talking about Brazil as a whole in all biomes, or at least the main biomes. And how are you going about it? Because people understand when you talk about restoration that it means just to plant trees, and the restoration of the Cerrado. You don't need to plant trees in the Cerrado. You have to manage to restore there the type of a field or grassland land that was burnt too often. And how are you working on making people aware of the fact that restoration is not just to plant trees? And also there are difficulties involved. Maybe we're still learning how to restore part of the Pantanal that was burnt too many times, or maybe it was used as pasture land too often. Well, Annie, I will start answering, and then my colleagues can complete my reply. Should I wait a little more? Oh, sorry. Good morning, all. Congratulations for your initiative. And I congratulate Brazilian NGOs for this undertaking. We see much difficulty in acceptance by producers, and we see difficulty in going into private property, because in a larger scale, the public sector can establish partnerships, but how can the private sector participate? How can you convince farmers to recover their area, even if it's free for them? They just offer the land, and we promote the restoration. It seems very simple, but it's expensive to fence a property and to convince a farmer to allow us to go in and restore it. How do you intend to go about it in this very ambitious goal of 4 million?
Luiz Fernando, da SOS Mata Atlântica, parabéns.
Luiz Fernando from SOS Mata Atlântica, congratulations. I would like Marina to talk about the public policies and instruments. How can you work on control and incentive? There is forestry control. This is mandatory, but it will take 20 years from the beginning of the validity of PRAs that are not even valid yet. Everyone thinks the reforestation is already underway, but in reality, it hasn't even started.
E muitos que ainda nem validaram o cara, enfim, toda aquela história que a gente já sabe.
Well, you know the whole story. Many people in organizations, they associate the non-compliance with the legal reserve as a synonym to restoration, because the assets are greater than the deficit, and the PRAs are remissive. They have offsetting instruments, And the desire to restore will have to depend on the farmers' goodwill, because they will have many other options. We cannot count on that as something that will necessarily be restored. This means that the decision for someone to decide and plant forest outside the APP, well, this is an economic decision that will have to turn a farmer into a forest man. And the time in forests require generations. The guy has a livestock or sugarcane farm. He goes there once a year to plant species with different genetics, different management. It's going to be much more complex than what he does today. I am exaggerating, I know, but how will you go about this challenge between the control and this cultural change that is required, that is generational, because the public policy will not cope with it. You may agree, or you may disagree with me, but when you sound the bell at the entrance, at the gate of the farm, it's going to be very difficult. It is surreal to get to go to someone in Piracicaba, in the region where there is most governors in Brazil. You offer him a free forest and he doesn't want it. He has no appetite for that. Alexandre, would you like to take the floor first? Well, I'm jumping into the fire because I will have to leave you.
Não, vamos lá por etapas. Obviamente que as coisas, para mim,
Now,
eu vejo de uma
let's do it in steps.
tem aquela máxima de que olho vermelho no olho verde.
There is a saying that a producer in the red won't look at the green. We all know that. So you can never get to Pardinho and do things. We cannot. Our partner who is there will have to do it. And to gain their confidence is not easy. I am from a farmer's family. And if anyone came to my father and proposed that, my father would say, you won't set one foot in my farm. But anyway, when you start gaining scale, then there will be a generational response. There is a learning curve before you gain scale. It's going to be a big national process with schools and on forest restoration. That's going to be the way. When you talk about restoration, normally it's cost. If it's free, you think it's excellent. If anyone offers that to you, it's great, but people are not willing. So there's a case. Thiago in Brazil gave me a whole lecture on what they are doing in Espírito Santo with coffee. They work with coffee there, and they are doing something very nice. They are planting coffee in the shade of taller trees, but they take longer to grow. However, the proposal is that they will buy the coffee from the planters. Then the guy will have the short-term benefit of the coffee. Now, to move from livestock to coffee is quite, it's a tall order. The idea of a partnership is, at least in the three main biomes, Mata Atlântica, Cerrado, and the Amazon. I would love to look at other biomes as well. But if we start with 3 and it works out, Then we move on to the fourth biome and the fifth. We have the energy, the ambition, the will. We always think we're going to change the world, and we believe we will meet the goal. We're capable of that. Thank you.
Com certeza, Leonardo. Acho que tem
Sure, Leonardo. Three things. First of all, Brazil is the restoration country. It's happening already here in Brazil, and it must include people to transform products and services from the forest into commodities doesn't solve the problem. We have to do something different. We want a forestry economy that keeps the forest standing. Only a change in culture or just the union of four large organizations is not going to do the trick. We are going to have a recent inflow of private capital, and just the change of crop won't get us anywhere. We have to think about that. And also, we are not restoring the forest. What helps us in this perspective of recovering ecological systems, but also involving the private sector, is the concept of a natural capital. To restore is not just to plant trees. A forest is not a bunch of trees. No, we have also the people who live there, and they have an assessment of the value of those goods and services to them. Unless we take all this into account, we won't get anywhere. There's no point in having a simplistic view on what a forest is and just the carbon potential it has. It's something wider, more complex. To maintain natural capital in private property is a condition of the notion of private property itself. You have to maintain this value on your farm in order to keep your private property. This means family succession. No one is going to solve the problem alone. We want to solve the problem all together, and we will only succeed if each one does his own part.
Obrigado, Leonardo.
Thank you, Leonardo. Carolina, could you add something to what was said? I'll try and be brief. Well, for those who are not here with us, there are 4 international institutions here, but there are national giants in the audience. I wanted to mention that. We have historical achievements in Brazil, and the advantage here, we have to include a movement, channels from abroad. Very few countries have the level of excellence that we're capable of having. I find it interesting. When I understood better the alliance and the forest team, they talk about a restoration movement. And I asked them, do you mean a movement? And they said, yes, it is a movement. It's the whole of society. Everyone is together. Everyone is working. And I think this is part of the response from the community. At PRI, we have a tool we call Rowan, and it was developed to understand better the perception of the local community before starting restoration, what they considered to be benefits. One of the researchers, well, the local community said, we want water. We will do that for water. And this made the whole difference, this identification to create a whole restoration project in the region, focusing on what they needed, that gained so much local support that the project is going to go on forever. They absorb that to their desires in the community. So the challenge of initiatives and movements such as these, well, in this urgency to solve climate issues and recover systems, that does not reduce the importance of the social capital in the place.
And I believe that here we go to a cultural point, as it mentioned. It will take some while, yes, but we have to understand that their aspirations, their expectations, and try to match ours of restoration. Because economic benefit we have, benefit for the economy we have. So, and other generations will understand this even better. So before opening for a second round of questions, I'd just like to tackle on public policies that you raised. And so, for instance, I would like to give the example of Pará, where I have been working. So very together with the government, so associating also the creation of the fund of Eastern Amazon that used to be a support of the initiatives of restoration. So I have to think also what we learned in the Mantiqueira Mountains. That will arrive a moment where we have to think, what about the water tariff will cover the price because of the real cost of water? And there is a social aspect of thinking how we can do this, but the major water consumers, they could be paying a little more for the water that they receive. So we have to think in pricing, etc. And I agree fully and agree totally with you about saying, look, it is a movement. It's not that we only need the institutional arrangements that were discussed here already include all these organizations. If it doesn't include yours, we have to be sure that you will be in also. And this is very important. So please, other questions now? I'm called Pauli. Thank you very much. I'm here representing the University of Louvain, the Dutch, but I know a little bit about this context. So just to comment first about the topics that have been mentioned, I did a survey about the problem of small growers adhering in the system in the Cantarina chain. It was very local. It was a social participation of growers in this conservation project, and this wanted to bring sustainability for the Cantarina system. And I identified the growers from Casa de Agricultura in São Paulo as mobilizers so that growers could join these projects. But there was a big lack of human resources and financial resources, right? And in this topic, small town, we see if these mobilizers would have more resources, they would manage to help IP to do more reforestation. But going to my question, I believe that Miguel mentioned the fact that you are very large for large organizations, but you want to promote initiatives from the bottom to the top. And I want to know what methods do you want to use with this bottom top approach and how you can do this in such a context. Thank you. Good morning. I am Azevedo. I worked in the GBS Fund for the Amazon. I worked for EPAM for many years too. And we are working with this topic for quite a while now. So there is some time that I heard about this alliance at the time. It was Mauricio from CI that told me. I am a member, council member there at CI. And as soon as I joined the fund, I said, well, why don't we get the growers that are on the list? They have a list of growers that cannot sell, that are banned, and all of the slaughterhouse, they do this kind of criteria and put together with an initiative like this, because they need is different from what I want. I need to be convinced, because if we have all of this, and if we have obviously the need, everything becomes easier. So I was thinking since that time, and I never got an answer. Of course, we can talk much more about this, but how do you understand? I write a little late, I'm sorry. Is there a size of property? Is there something that prevents this kind of partnership? Because it could be an interesting arrangement. It's just to provoke you on this. I believe that we can find this demand in a simpler way, because what Luis mentioned is very true. Not even with a small, with a big, then if they have this need to be in the market, but the small won't allow part of his property to be used. I am in the Amazon with this project, exactly with what you're saying with livestock, and they need, if they don't have the profitability, and they were talking about cocoa, they will continue deforesting because livestock doesn't make ends meet. 3,500 reais a year for 25 hectares is less than the family allowance. So you need a return to the small grower. There is no other possibility, and unless at the sources where you need to make an ecological restoration. If you have PSA, even better. But it was just to understand your opinion about this kind of possibility. Well, let's start with you, Miguel, that can contribute in these two questions. Yes, I would like to add first about what Paulini said. I believe that social participation is essential if we want permanence of this secondary vegetation that we know that's the key for this movement of restoration. And then here we have a few points. To start with, legislation and public policies. The Atlantic Forest and the law of the Atlantic Forest has a provision for the protection of a secondary vegetation, was able to increase significantly in the past decade to the permanence of these fragments in the biome. Whereas in the Amazon, we have a permanence of around 5 years. In the Atlantic Forest, it's now close to 10. So this is the impact that the public policy may bring. It's very important to consider this. But here we have also a market approach. The rural credit today, the way as it is structured, it brings a bottleneck to the grower, especially the small one, that it remains very dependent on the private from capital to pay for the cost of the production. So if he already has some difficulties to pay for this credit, it's very difficult for him to take chances to other roads and try other credit opportunities to do something that he is not an expert on, or that he's afraid of not doing it well. So it's a risk, right? It's an investment by the grower himself. So we also have to analyze the rural credit and the incentives. We mentioned here oil and gas and other sectors of the economy that developed through incentives, through governmental programs for decades, for a very long term of investments. So why do we think that restoration will just be born alone and developed alone? No, it has to be a priority. It needs to be a public policy. We have to analyze restoration as a solution. Otherwise, we won't move forward. But now, how do we do to guarantee that we are going to have this participation bottom top of the collectives and have this apport? We have worked with these collectives to understand what are their demands, what are the opportunities. That is, the pipelines of projects that are developed by these collectives themselves, that are restructuring to map the areas of restoration. They are separating banks of areas of restoration. So in their self-organization, they are showing us the way. So the idea It's not that four international organizations come showing different routes. Certainly not. Here, what we want is to feed these roads that are identified bottom top so that they continue growing and developing. And now here, Leonardo, very quickly about what Andrea said. And then I said, I would like to be here there with you, with all the colleagues. I'm anxious of being here on the other side of the screen, but anyhow, the agenda with the blacklist growers are not always very easy because sometimes we come into a friction, a conflict relationship that was fed up for several years, and there is no dichotomy. You want the same thing, but eventually the partners with the growers are a little more complex, especially in what tackles on the permanence, exactly because it's not their business. It's not something that they need to do to unblock a productive process. It's almost like doing because of a duty. So we don't have a cultural change. We have an obligation of doing. I get the money, I have to do it. And then what we find is that sometimes the relationship with the NGOs of the third sector is not exactly what these growers are looking for. I particularly believe very much in the economy of the restoration, in that the commercial demand will require the restructuring of the chain of the restoration. We need service renderers that meet this demand of the grower that needs to do, that wants to do here to get rid of that, etc. Because the NGOs have a limited capacity. We work in a vacuum of a public policy, to say like this, trying to remove that from the inertia. It's more a commercial demand that needs a structure than we need fostering the sector of the economy. If we don't understand the restoration as an economic opportunity or opportunity of development, if we consider restoration as an environmental agenda, it will remain there in the third sector, and we don't want this. We want effective a solution for the social dilemma. So that's it, Leonardo. Thank you very much. Very good. Miguel, I also would like to ask Carolina that as she also answers these questions, that you could also say your final words, because our time is almost up, and then we return to Miguel and I close the session here, right? Okay, Carolina. Well, as about the bottom top and how to involve local communities, it would be important to talk about our 6 pillars because they help to explain this. So the Alliance has very much this objective of trying to use a co-joint synergy to what in English we call the enabling conditions. So allow the conditions in scale here in Brazil to exist and get consolidated. And for this, we mapped 6 pillars, which is to help to strengthen regional governance. So that point of communities and the state, they have to be ready to this kind of economy arriving to bring financial innovation and qualify people in the region to be able to join the system. Science and technology, as I mentioned, there is a calculation that for each dollar invested, we could recover $2.39, especially in research related to native forestry, and communicate the results well so people can understand well what is at stake, the cost-benefit game, to support in the formulation of public policies that can be in the municipal scale, on the state, and also on the federal scale, and to promote access to the market, and to making a bridge to Andrea's question, because actually you need to put food on the table, or while this is not possible, restoration won't be possible. And going to my final considerations, I believe that we have to remember that it's a situation, people, we want restoration to happen now and on scale, but it will be a transition. Even if we want to go fast, it will be a transition. And during this transition, we have the current economy, we have the income issues for the families, and we have to see how this transition will happen in a sustainable way, in a fair way, and people have to mature these new realities with their families in their communities. It is a point that goes counterclockwise, yes, but we have to respect these times, otherwise projects won't become so robust in the long term as they need to be. So a little resilience and patience. Miguel, would you like to say your final words, please? Sure, actually, just to reinforce what I said, I believe that Brazil is the country of restoration. It is happening here in scale, and we need the support of everybody, of the whole world working so that we turn the restoration a solution and not a problem, a solution for social problems mainly. And in this moment, I would like to thank you, Carolina, Miguel, Alexandre. Unfortunately, he had to leave us a little earlier for your participation and confirm, despite we are here, the 4 major international organizations, this is not the objective, as we said. Only in the Amazon region, we have 80 organizations. In the Atlantic forest. Would even be nice to have this on paper to see the size that this movement represents. But one thing is that I learned is that when we reach enough answers for the challenge that we have in hand, so with the speed that we need, we will have to do with partnership. Impossible to do without it. So here we will have to explore a little more this discussion about how to bring the agents, especially from the real economy, the big growers, to invest more in this process and think on the financing mechanisms that need to be clearer. We see money of restoration being returned to the government because there are a lack of plans. So we see now clearer how this strategic union is helping us to increase the rhythm and the scale of restoration. And I understand this as a process of transformation where the butterfly is almost opening its wings. It's that moment when we are going to identify the pains of the last moment. So when the caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, but I see the butterfly emerging, and my dream is to see this bringing the best colors as possible to be green butterfly as well. So thank you very much for your participation and success for the next event.